Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Michael, it is May 1st, 2026, and it is astounding to me that we're together every week, almost every week, occasionally every 2 weeks, and it is amazing how many things are happening now each week.
Well, if you pay attention, you know, the world is a big place, but to me it's really interesting to see it thematically, to find patterns in those things and to then play with what they mean. I think that's what interests me a lot about participating in this podcast. Well, it's finding themes and patterns.
Yeah, and you know, we talk about the first two episodes that we did were about the island and the core principles, the pillars. We say there are 5 pillars that a civil society that is prosperous.
So let's just drop back for a second. For anyone who hasn't heard those episodes,
yes,
the island is a conceptual construct that you did with another guy for a class you were building to teach college-age people about how economies work.
A gentleman named Mark Stengel.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it really was an excellent job, and you continue to use this as a way of explaining the basis of economics that strip away a lot of the complex stuff that distracts.
Right, and those are our first 2 episodes, and maybe even the first 3 of this podcast From Our Generation. But what we point out in there is there are certain terms that really have meaning over time, over long stretches of time.
Right.
One of them is, how do we define time in an economic sense? And on the island, we define time as the origin of capital.
Yes.
So when this person wakes up in the morning, this person has 16 hours of time or 16 hours of capital to use to convert the raw materials that are on the island into consumable goods for them to consume so that they can survive.
Right.
And economic systems are about deploying time in
and
ways
labor.
that create time and labor to create and capital. And so it's all these things.
Right.
And if you misapply time, then that is another way of saying you wasted time.
Right.
Meaning you wasted capital.
Yes.
And so if governments pass laws or rules that cause people to spend time, especially enormous amounts of time, complying with the government, that is time that could have been spent on something else, and it wouldn't have been spent on complying with the government unless the government required the compliance. And so much of what we're going to be talking about today falls into that category from an economic standpoint, but we're also going to get into some political events that have happened, mostly through the courts and through efforts by each party to position itself for the midterms.
Right.
And so
this is sort of a kaleidoscope of stories and incidents that we've noticed in the news, particularly you, over the last week.
Yeah.
And we're going to go through those and try to apply to these principles we've been talking about.
Right. And we're going to get into the 5, first of all, about the 5 things, the 5 pillars
of prosperity.
Of prosperity and a civil society.
Yes.
And that is, one is, and these are not in any particular order. They are all important. Low taxes, reasonable regulations,
right?
Low levels of corruption generally.
Yes.
Rule of law, meaning equal treatment under the law,
right?
And sound money.
Good.
Meaning that people know that the value of the money is they know what the value of $1 is tomorrow and the next day. Whereas, for example, in countries that have hyperinflation, that's not sound money.
Yeah.
In fact, even extreme inflation or high inflation really gets it begins to affect the foundations of a civil prosperous society.
Right.
So we're going to get into some of these things. The first one we're going to talk about is in the area of politics, and it has to do with Virginia's redistricting. And I'm bringing that up because what the Virginia legislature did was they changed the law, and they passed the law. Then they put a referendum before the voters that then changed the redistricting. It passed 51-49. But under the Virginia Constitution, there is a process that the legislature must follow in order to do that.
In order to redistrict.
In order to redistrict or put anything before the voters for a referendum.
Okay.
And one of the things that they have to do is they have to do that. There has to be an election in between two events, and the other is that the final passage by the legislature or the referendum has to be within 90 days of there's a 90-day period that has to do with the elections.
Yes,
it has to be 90 days before the election. And so what happened in this case was Virginia passed it, and the Virginia Attorney General's office that's trying to defend this new redistricting is trying to make the claim that an election is determined by election day, not and early voting doesn't count at all.
So you mean the definition of an election is the day of the election is what constitutes the election,
yes.
not the 60 days leading up to it, even though people might be voting early.
People are voting early, not might be.
Well,
they are.
Well, yes, they are, but it's provided that they can vote 60 days earlier. In this case, they did not pass a law before that 60 days started.
Correct.
People were already voting, and now they claim that the interim election, they call it,
yes,
is what's coming at the end of that period, and they ignore.
Right. And so that's probably the most difficult hurdle for them to overcome. And the Supreme Court of Virginia is taking this up very, very quickly.
Well,
yes. A lower court judge ruled that told the state of Virginia that they cannot move forward on the redistricting because they didn't comply with the law.
That was within 1 day or so.
That was the next day.
Yeah.
And so now the Supreme Court, I think the Supreme Court actually is of Virginia, the state Supreme Court has already heard the arguments and will be issuing a ruling by the middle of May. So if that were to go against, and this was a partisan effort to change the 6-4. I believe it's 6 Democrats now, 4 Republicans, or it might be 7-4, but it'll be either 9-1 or 10-1. And it's not that the legislature doesn't have the authority to do it. It's that they didn't do it
by their own rules.
By their own rules.
Are these constitutional rules or legislative rules?
Constitutional rules.
Okay, so this is important because you can't change your constitution on a whim.
It's state, and this is a state constitution,
right? Now, even the U.S. government is set up to have one body that's very responsive to public opinion. That's the House of Representatives, and then the Senate has to go along, and it's supposed to be more deliberative.
Well, and then also our Constitution says that there are certain things that the Congress can't do, even if it wants to.
That's right,
and that's where you get into the separation of states' rights versus federal powers.
Yeah, and hierarchy of laws within the government. Constitutional laws are superior to statutes and things like that. So all of this is involved in this dispute, right?
Yes.
U.S. Senate has been called a cooling saucer for hot coffee. You know, people get passionate and they want to change, and it might be mistaken because haste brings waste. And so the idea is that things should be more deliberated, especially important changes and things that are governed at a constitutional level. So Virginia has not done that. I think it's likely that their state is going to overturn it.
The Supreme Court.
Their state Supreme Court,
yeah.
Yes, is what I meant to say, will overturn it. But you get to the point of the rule of law. Do you have partisans on this court who want this outcome and will find a rationale that justifies it?
The court is made up of 4 Republican appointees and 3 Democrat appointees. Okay. So if partisan is the issue, then it'll be interesting to see. But the lower courts, the judge in the lower court clearly stated what the legislature of Virginia didn't do. In other words, what they failed to do.
Right.
So that'll be very interesting. And the reason and this is also interesting, is that the Florida legislature passed a redistricting in the state of Florida, but under its state constitution, it has the power to do it. It doesn't have to have a
Yes.
referendum under the Florida state
So
constitution.
you have the possibility this may fail in Virginia, which is a Democratic initiative to get more Democratic seats in the U.S. legislature.
Right.
House of Representatives. Florida is a red state, and they may prevail because
They will prevail because, or I shouldn't say they will. The Supreme
think they
Court,
will?
the
Yeah.
Supreme Court has ruled that the Texas redistrict, the U.S. Supreme Court
Yeah.
has ruled that the Texas redistricting is legal,
Yes,
and they did what that it was legal.
and it's a change that advantages
Republicans, and so Florida now is essentially doing the same thing that Texas did, using exactly the same process because the state constitution in Florida allows it.
My point was that if someone looks at this through a purely partisan lens, they will be upset that it succeeds in red states and doesn't succeed in a blue state.
Well,
they will see that as unequal application of the law.
Right, but the law is
different in different states.
It's different states, and that's part of how we're organized.
Yeah.
Now, in a case that is also related to the same question, is you had the U.S. Supreme Court rule that in the state of Louisiana has two congressional districts. Louisiana has 6 congressional districts total. Because of the Civil Rights Act and how it was of 1965 and how it was applied, especially in southern states, part of redistricting that's been done by southern states has included districts where they're designed to be like 90% black, and they're designed that way because that was how the law was interpreted. That you had to do that in the southern states because of all of the previous stuff done by legislatures in the southern states before the Civil Rights Act,
which is really bad stuff. But
terrible stuff. It was poll taxes and you had to take a test, and it was these were the Jim Crow laws, which interestingly enough were passed by Democrat legislatures and signed by Democrat governors in 100% of the cases. And so when Democrats complain about the Jim Crow laws, they're the ones who wrote them.
Yes.
And they're the ones who passed them. So I find that kind of
history is very much shaded or ignored because Lincoln was a Republican and blacks were Republicans for a long time after the Civil War because he had emancipated them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it was Republicans who stood by blacks after the Civil War. There were hundreds of black people who won elections in the South during the period when the U.S. troops were in the South protecting the rights of new citizens who are black.
Right.
And so it's an interesting history. But this Supreme Court, because what happened was the U.S. Supreme Court. What happened was some people in Louisiana who described themselves in the suit as non-black voters.
Okay.
They believed that their civil rights were being infringed by having black-only districts. That they weren't that the state had drawn the maps to exclude whites from 2 districts, and so the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot design. This ruling came out in
last week.
Yeah,
within the last
within the
last week. One day this week.
Yeah, and it came out and said that states cannot design districts by race. And so what Louisiana is now going to do, they are now delaying their primary from May 16th so that they can redraw the districts to comply with the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling.
I think their attorney general said we're not going to have an election that doesn't obey this law.
Right, and
but that's pretty quick.
So right now there are 4 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Both of the Democrats represent all black districts, or essentially all black districts.
Right.
And so they're now going to redraw the maps, and they'll end up with either 5 Republicans or they'll end up with 6 Republicans. Now, what's interesting to me is beyond the political. To me, this gets into the culture and the fabric of our country, and that's what I want to focus on here.
Okay.
Because if you're a person who is running for office in a black-only district, the winner is likely to be black. I'm not going to say always is, because we actually have an example here in Tennessee of a district in Memphis that is almost exclusively black that has been represented by Steve Cohen, who is
white
not
guy.
black,
Yeah.
for I guess maybe 20 years.
Right.
And he is now being challenged. Interestingly, because he's a pretty old fella. He's now being challenged by Justin Jones. I think it's Justin Jones, who is black.
Yeah.
And will likely and the black fellow will likely beat Steve Cohen in the primary
As things currently stand.
as they stand. Yes.
But this may change if Tennessee redraws its districts
And
for the same reasons.
Tennessee is considering having a special session
Right.
to be called almost, I guess it has to be called almost immediately to redraw the districts. I'm not sure that's wise to do that quickly and hastily, but it'll get done between now and the 28 election for sure.
Well, back to our prior point, there's reason to stretch things out.
Yes.
The Electoral College is a similar kind of mechanism to stretch things out and make them a little less sensitive to tidal waves of opinion.
Yeah. But here's an interesting question, Michael, and this is what I want to get into. So right now in Louisiana, I'm going to use Louisiana because the data was clearer in Louisiana.
Yes.
In Louisiana, about 1/3 of the population is black.
Yes.
There are 6 congressional seats, and so they took 1/3 of the population and made 2 almost all black districts,
Right.
represented by 2 black people who had no interest and no need to appeal to white people when they run for office.
Well, this is the point. You have to
also,
appeal to somebody more than a special interest.
Well, but let me just finish the thought. And on the same in the same sense, there are 4 congressmen who represent only white people, because all the black people were stuck into 2 districts.
Yes.
So now the 4 white congressmen, they don't have to appeal to black people at all because they don't have any black constituents.
Yes.
Is it better for our society if say just say they redo the maps so that every district was 1/3 black and 2/3 white? Now, if I'm white and I want to win that district, it seems to me like I need to be aware of the needs and concerns of 1/3 of the population if they see themselves as, at least in the short term, see themselves as different from the other 2/3. Over time, because I think black people have the same desires as white people in terms of prosperity, individual rights, and these types of things.
They have a lot of the same desires, and they have some that are different.
Yes.
I would say the point is, if you proceed with this kind of regime where it's thought that you are only represented if you have a person that has the same skin color as you,
Mm-hmm.
why not the same gender, same color of eyes, the same profession?
Yeah.
I'm not really well represented probably if I look at some of those kind of things. It doesn't matter. I get a vote.
Right.
And it balkanizes people when you follow this ideology that you're only fairly represented if somebody of your race is your congressman.
Right. And more, it's not from the voter standpoint, it's from the representative standpoint, is that the representative does not have to be concerned. If Congress didn't have the power that it currently has to pass laws that affect everybody in the country, I wouldn't much care about this. If we went back 100 years, when Calvin Coolidge gave his speech and said the total federal government was $2.3 billion,
right,
and 2/3 of it
right.
was defense spending, which meant that total federal spending was
discretionary spending was 1/3 of $2 billion.
Yeah, so $800 million. Yeah. It's 10,000 times that big now. Yeah. And by the way, all the fighting and violence and everything, and everybody yelling and screaming, that has to do with where the money is and where the power is.
Well, back to our pillar, that has to do with light regulation rather than heavy.
And corruption.
Heavily regulated.
And corruption.
And corruption.
Yeah.
That reshapes our lives.
And sound money. I mean, it literally has to do with all of our pillars.
So we're affected by what goes on in this dispute in Louisiana.
Absolutely.
I want to make one other point, that the Electoral College was designed specifically for this same reason, which is for everybody to be represented. Mm-hmm. If there wasn't the Electoral College, basically at the national level, they would need to go to the large cities.
Right.
Now, 250 years on, that means they would go to New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, maybe Houston and Dallas, maybe Miami, a few others. But they really wouldn't need to care about what goes on in Montana and Wyoming. Those people would lose their representation at the federal level because the votes would be so massed from the cities that's where the politicians would address.
And then what would happen in short order is that the people who control Congress would then change the Constitution so that people who live in Montana wouldn't even have states' rights to decide what the laws will be that they will live under within the state.
That's speculative, but you might be right. I'd have to think through that.
Well, this goes back to the Federalist Papers.
Yeah.
I'm just stating what's in the Federalist Papers that they predicted. If we don't do this, then this is what will happen.
Okay.
And it's kind of like it's James Madison. I'm glad you brought it up because I forgot to read this quote. This is from Federalist 51. James Madison recognized, quote, the great difficulty of self-government is you must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. And I mean, and that is what the founders wrestled with when they were drafting the Constitution. That's why they had three branches of government that would check each other.
Right.
That's why they tried to limit what the federal government could do and left most of the decisions that affected people's daily lives at the state level.
Yes.
And then that is a way to check power.
And they were very suspicious of majorities.
Yes. Oh,
the tyranny of the majority, and with all kinds of institutions, individual rights and checks and balances and others, to make sure that the will of 51% of the people doesn't trample the other 49.
Yeah.
Which is a problem we have now in a polarized world where very few people get more than 53 or 4%. It's heavily divided.
Well,
and you get these swings.
Well, but not in these districts that are all black districts.
That's right. But
that's
nationally
80%.
as a whole, we're kind of well divided, and we kind of bounce like a pendulum between one or the other. And part of what we're talking about is a more representative way of would express our mutual interest more powerfully than our separate interests.
And the people who are angry about this Supreme Court ruling, they make the claim that black people can't win elections unless the population that elects them is vastly majority black, or at least majority black. And my response to that is, well, how did Tim Scott win a Senate seat in South Carolina? Well, that's an anomaly. I said, no, it's not an anomaly. How did he do it? How do black Republicans win House seats in majority white districts? How do they do that? They make arguments about public policy that appeal to the district that they represent.
Well,
so
President Obama had lots of white supporters.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And so I think that this ruling, while in the short term will create angst and division, I think it's going to produce better candidates, both black and white candidates. White candidates who have to appeal to a 30 or 40% black populated district that they don't have to worry about now. And contrary, if you are a black candidate and you want to run in a district that's 40% black, you have to figure out your policies and the way that you see public policy. You have to appeal to white voters also, in addition to black voters, which I think I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and this is a simplified discussion because it involves only two races, but of course we've got dozens of ethnicities. There are Hispanics, there are Asians, and the same argument applies.
Yeah, it does, but we've never the
districts drawn
have never been drawn that way.
But still, the blending of interest is the point.
Yes, yeah. So the next one that I want to get to is this is a ruling from in New Jersey. 9-0 decision by the Supreme Court, which is interesting, 9-0.
Very rare.
What you had is a pregnancy center in New Jersey that did not perform abortions. What it did was it did everything that it could to encourage the mother to keep the baby and to birth the baby.
Yes.
And
is this a private entity?
It's a private entity. It's called First Choice, and I'll just read from this article here. First Choice runs 5 faith-based pregnancy centers providing free ultrasounds and other services, but not abortions. Despite no public complaints about deceptive conduct by the nonprofit, New Jersey's Attorney General in 2023 demanded First Choice hand over the names and addresses of all of its donors.
Okay, let's stop for a second. Who said it's deceptive?
Nobody did.
Well, you just read it. Despite something about the deceptive conduct.
No, I said despite no public complaints about deceptive.
Okay.
The U.S. attorney I mean, not the
so
U.S.
no one
attorney.
has claimed that they were deceiving anyone. That's
Right.
what that means. All right.
Right. No one.
I misheard it.
Right. And it's okay.
Okay.
I have to deal with that. Anyway, so the Attorney General in 2023 of New Jersey didn't like that, so demanded the list of 5,000 donors, and so First Choice said, well, no, we're a private organization, and the Supreme Court ruled that many years ago the NAACP did not have to turn over its donor list to essentially a racist Attorney General at that time.
Yeah.
And so we don't believe we have to either. The lower court judge said to First Choice, you don't have standing. You can't sue on this
Because you haven't been harmed yet.
You haven't been harmed yet. So, which essentially the lower court judge was saying, you have to turn over the 5,000, then you can sue.
After you get harmed.
After you, yeah. And so the Supreme Court that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled 9-0. That harm happened at the moment the Attorney General demanded it and threatened fines if they didn't turn it over.
This is an interesting corner of the law because I think the concept of standing is designed so that you don't have a lot of speculative cases about what could happen, and people that are not involved and personally influenced by something might bring a suit about what might happen to you because of something of what your wife did or your cousin did. And that's kind of a fool's game. They restrict their activity to actual cases and actual consequences. Consequences.
Yeah, and in this case, the party that was demanded, that the Attorney General was demanding, but it's fascinating that a lower court judge could rule one way, and all 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices ruled that judge had ruled improperly.
Yeah, one of my good friends, who was a good friend of yours as well, had a story, was discussing with me a story like this, and he said, that is close to a bitch slap as you're going to get in the judiciary.
Yeah. Yeah, that is. And here's what's so fascinating about the way our system works is that of the position, there are 2 positions in this country where you can use your power to either do great harm or to attempt to do great harm. And even when you're caught, nothing happens to you. One is if you're a regulator and you try to impose onerous regulations. And until recently, not only did you try to do it, you actually were able to do it.
Yes.
Now you can't because the Supreme Court changed a Chevron decision, which had stood for close to 40 years.
Yeah, so this was called Chevron deference. I suppose Chevron Company was involved in some regulation, and the judiciary basically said, we're not experts on this. We've got to defer to the administrative state.
Not only do you have to, they said the Chevron could that parties who were harmed by new regulations couldn't turn to the courts. Couldn't turn to the courts, and that went on for 40 years. So the Supreme Court overturned that and said, no, if you believe that you've been harmed by a regulator illegally, you can go to court to overturn that.
So this is clearly about rule of law, back to our principles.
Yes, and corruption. And corruption.
And there's another case coming where the Supreme Court is going to review the ability of one of the big agencies to have its own tribunals.
Yes,
which functions like a judiciary within the agency.
Yep, that was another one that I have here, and that is the Supreme Court agrees to hear challenge to in-house tribunals at the Labor Department.
Okay.
And this is where the Labor Department is trying to promulgate regulations, primarily in the agricultural area, having to do with labor.
Yeah.
And
then they prosecute the regulations because they're part of the executive branch.
Yes.
And then when somebody complains, they decide who wins.
Well, yes, and they also then impose the fine.
Yeah.
So in other words, they are the judge, they're the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury.
Yes.
And so this article says the U.S. Supreme Court on April 27th agreed to consider whether the Department of Labor's in-house administrative tribunals can levy large fines on employers for violating agricultural visa rules and whether or not that's constitutional.
Visa.
I'm supposing it has to do with immigration visas.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I don't think it's
about
Visa
workers
card.
on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
will be really interested to see that decision and why it's not 9-0. What would be the rationale, and is there a legal rationale, as opposed to a partisan rationale?
And the great thing about it is, Michael, if it's not 9-0, they do write dissents, and so you
Right.
can read the dissent. Which
Right.
some of those things are fascinating, and other times they're amusing.
They
but,
are.
But
And sometimes they're like laying eggs for the future change.
oh yes, yeah, and this is one that following along these same lines. This is one where the headline is, and this is in an area where people have very strong opinions. So the headline doesn't get to the essence of the issue here. The headline is high stakes machine gun case could finally settle decades long constitutional battle. So back in the 40s, the Congress passed a law having to do. Actually, I take that back. It wasn't even. It was. I guess it was a regulator. It was a farmer in Texas who grew wheat that then the farmer never sold
For his own consumption.
for his and his farm's own consumption.
Okay.
And never sold it. And so it obviously didn't go across state lines because it never left the farm.
Right.
But yet the Supreme Court ruled that Congress could regulate that farmer because of they claimed just because he grew it, it reduced and then consumed it himself. It reduced his demand for other people's wheat.
So it had consequences across state lines.
Yes. Yes, that's
and
what.
thus was regulatable.
Yes,
by the federal government.
Now, those things have been. This gets back to Madison's quote about you want to give the government certain powers, but you need to figure out how to oblige it to control itself. And so now what we have is we now have the case of a machine gun, and machine guns have been highly regulated at state levels, but now you have this case where the machine gun has never left the state, and so this will be one where the Supreme Court has a chance to use this case to redefine
the wheat case.
Yes, and here's what's interesting about it's not just the wheat case. Here's what's interesting about this article. So I'm going to just quote a couple of things. It says the Constitution only mentions four crimes because let's go back to how the Constitution was designed. What it was designed to do. It was designed to empower the federal government and to empower the states
with whatever was left over after what they put in the federal government's hands.
And they put great limits on what the federal government had the authority to do.
Yes.
And that's how the Supreme Court had ruled and interpreted the Constitution for the first 150 years.
Yes.
But then in the 40s, under Roosevelt, he got the court to start changing the way that it interpreted the Constitution, and that gave rise to all of these alphabet agencies that then promulgated regulations across the entire country.
It was the beginning of a century-long departure from the principles of limited government that we started with in the original Constitution.
Right, and let's go back to the island and regulations. Let's go back to our 5 pillars. Heavy regulations are the same thing as a tax, maybe even worse, because it forces people in the private sector to spend enormous amounts of their time and capital complying with the regulations. It also keeps a lot of people from doing things that they would do if the regulations didn't exist, and so the regulations actually affect commerce.
Yes.
Even though they're trying to protect the country or protect the citizens, they're actually doing the opposite. Many of them for their own partisan or they have their hand out because they've got lobbyists who support their position. But I'm just going to read here. In fact, the Constitution only mentioned 4 crimes: counterfeiting U.S. currency and bonds, piracy and felonies committed on the high seas, offense against the law of nations, and treason. So those were the only 4 federal crimes listed in the Constitution. Yet by 1980, the Department of Justice counted at least 3,000 federal criminal offenses.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, and this whole area is when the federal government is able to just reach out and affect
prosecute
somebody's life. And they're saying, what did I do?
Yeah.
You don't know the number of laws in the Federal Registry would be enough to stack up and it'd go to the ceiling of this room. How somebody is supposed to know all those laws and follow those laws is the notion is ridiculous. So this particular case is going to we'll see whether or not this case is used to once again rein in the federal government and leave things at the state level.
Yes, which, by the way, was what Dobbs did about abortion.
Yes.
One of the biggest controversies in the last half century has been abortion. Roe v. Wade was in the 70s, I think.
Roe v. Wade was passed in the 60s.
60s, okay.
Yeah.
And so it's been a big controversy most of my lifetime. Mm-hmm. And it was reversed a few years ago and given back to the states. Basically said the federal government has no business regulating this.
And now abortion is really not even an issue in federal elections.
Right.
Because each state has kind of come up with its own solutions at the state level.
Right.
And so if somebody runs for office on the issue of abortion, everybody kind of tunes them out because it's not that big a deal now because we now have a whole bunch of different states with applying the law of creating their own laws on that particular issue.
Let me mention a theme here, and that is universalism. I'm very suspicious of universalism because we are very different and we want different things. Mm-hmm. And so this kind of federal regime where states are independent permits that. You find your own way and you make your own ballots, and it may change over time as your population changes, but you don't pretend to have one right rule for everybody of a nation of $330 million.
Right.
Dollars, I'm sorry.
People.
And one of the consequences there is this, we were talking about universal, blending interests and treating everybody the same, which tends to be a universal kind of principle, right? That we all have things in common that
equal treatment under the law.
We ought to pay attention to.
Yeah.
But universalism in the law is too broad. So I'll have to think about this to articulate it better, but there's a conflict there. There's a rub that I think is very interesting. You want broad perspective, but you also don't want to be limiting the law to one rule for everybody.
Okay. I agree. I agree. The next case that comes up is, and this is all kind of in the same area, which is so fascinating to me, is this is a Medicaid fraud checkup. So I'm just going to read from the beginning here. And that is, the Trump administration last week ordered states to review qualifications of their Medicaid providers in an effort to clamp down on fraud. Then it goes on to say, Obamacare, this is a law passed exclusively by Democrats back when in 2010, when Obama was president. Obamacare, this is under their legislation, Obamacare requires states to revalidate all of their state Medicaid providers at least once every 5 years.
Right.
It requires that.
Right.
Well, the Trump administration has now done a study, and they have found that very, very few states follow the Obamacare law, and that many entities that were approved 8 to 9, 10 years ago have never been revalidated. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of revalidating, and there's a series of things you have to do when you revalidate, is to try to sniff out and find fraud. And so we have many states now that just simply almost do nothing. So I'll just read a few. Yet few states are complying with this Obamacare mandate. Some 58,000 of Illinois' 58,000 providers haven't been validated in 5 years. 58,000 in just one state. In Georgia, Georgia has revalidated only 11.4% in the last year. So that implies that in 5 years they would revalidate 50%.
Around half of them.
Yeah. In Michigan, they have last year it was 26,000 out of 257,000. And what we now have learned from Nick Shirley and other people who are now looking at the amount of fraud, particularly in Minnesota, but now in California and other states, is that the fraud is massive. Now, a lot of the regulators will claim in the states, well, we don't have time. We need more people if we're going to do this. And I have a suggestion. In the private sector healthcare, there are companies that are called revenue management companies. And what they do is they contract with hospitals to review all of their claims data to be sure that the hospital has made the claims that they are allowed to do under the law. And then there are also people who work for the insurance companies who do exactly the same thing to make sure that the hospitals are not overbilling the insurance companies.
Right.
And these revenue companies, they keep a small percentage of the problems that they find. That's how they make money. So I suggest that the way to handle this is you turn this over to the private sector, and you allow private companies to get access to the data. And if those private sector companies find fraud, and they have to spend their own money to do it,
yes.
If they find fraud, then they get to keep 10 or 15% of the money that they find. Now that saves the taxpayers the balance of it, and doing it that way doesn't cost the taxpayers a single penny.
Well, it changes the incentives. What I really like about this is the free market is good at allocating resources where there's going to be a return. Mm-hmm. I'm going to spend money if I get more back than I spend. And very rarely will you find businesses spending a lot of money on something that's going to do them no good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the incentives in the government are different. They're political. Is it going to advantage my side? I'll spend as much money as I can get away with to advantage my side and disadvantage the other side.
Right.
And so things don't get done or they get ignored. And so what you've proposed is a way of using a free market kind of principle where private entities will allocate their own resources and get a return on it.
Yes.
But they won't waste money going after red herrings.
Well, if they waste it, it's their money.
It's their money,
It didn't cost the taxpayers.
That's right.
And in fact, we already have that in some other areas of the federal government where if you are a whistleblower and on your own company,
right,
and you report where your company that you work for is overbilling the federal government, you get to keep some of it. You can keep some of that.
Right.
And so this would be applying that principle, which, by the way, that principle works nicely.
Yes.
Applying that against all of these third-party payment programs. So I think that one's interesting. This one is one that I just found there are two of them kind of.
That applies to our principle of low corruption.
Yes.
Okay. It's a method of restricting or containing corruption.
Yeah. And corruption is a natural thing. If people can steal without consequence, then some will. Not all people,
right?
But it only requires if 1% of the population decides that it's going to steal because it can get away with it. That's 3 million people. That's a lot of stealing.
Well, even if good people are hard up enough, are so distressed, they're likely to rationalize their way to doing.
And if the economy is run by a bunch of thieves,
they feel like they're being stolen from. Why don't I steal back?
Well, or their lives are so detrimentally affected that they do fall into the category where they are desperate.
This is what I mean by hard up.
Yes.
They rationalize why they should do this.
Yes. Now these two are similar. One is, and you and I both saw this, and that was Lee Zeldin, the head of the EPA.
Yes.
He was in front of a congressional committee that was he was testifying because it was a budget issue. It was a budgetary hearing.
They're proposed to cut the EPA budget by half. I think.
Half. And
the administration has proposed that.
Yes, and the Democrats on that committee don't want the EPA to be cut because part of if you cut the EPA in half, the number of employees at the EPA will likely fall by half.
And who are some of the most devout supporters of the left?
The left is government employee unions.
Yes,
and but so at any rate, so Lee Zeldin was testifying before this committee, and this one Democrat on there was obviously not she hadn't kept up with the law, and she hadn't kept up with Supreme Court decisions because she was demanding that the EPA continue to do something that the EPA had been doing. And Lee Zeldin said he cited the Supreme Court ruling that says we can't do that anymore. That's not legal. We must follow the law. So he kept bringing up the law, and and finally she said, "I don't care. You can't do that. You must." It was a fascinating thing to see that you have a person who's a member of Congress demanding that government not follow the law. Yeah. Think about that for a second.
That's astounding.
Yeah, yeah. And then in a similar story, this is a headline: "The Climate Lobby in the Courts." And this is there's a recent scandal. I'm going to quote here: "The recent scandal over the Federal Judicial Center's scientific manual for federal judges exposes how the purportedly neutral document was captured by climate change dogmatists with connections to the plaintiff bar." So there's a law firm, one law firm in particular, that is very large and sues regularly over climate issues and regulations. Well, what the House committee is now learning is that at the so-called independent center, the Federal Judicial Center, that is supposed to be nonpartisan and unbiased, that they have now they're learning that much of their information that they have used to write their manuals for judges on environmental questions is being written by
that firm,
by the lawyers who want to sue and win in front of judges. And so so that gets into the corruption. That gets to the pillar of corruption.
Well, this is like letting lobbyists write legislation that benefits their industries.
Well, and they do that, but this is worse. This is judges.
We're supposed to be impartial.
We were supposed to be impartial, and you can argue that members of Congress are supposed to represent constituencies. Judges are supposed to be impartial. They're not supposed to have a dog in the fight.
Yeah, and legislators are not supposed to be impartial.
No,
that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Right?
So I'm saying some legislators are better than others.
Right.
But all judges are supposed to be impartial, and judges are not scientists, and so they have to rely on organizations that provide them information that is supposed to be unbiased and not partisan.
Well, this was the impulse under the original Chevron decision. They're not scientists. They shouldn't be making scientific decisions. They should defer to expertise.
Yes.
And then you saw how that created a loophole where now the experts in the administrative state, in the bowels of the executive branch, have taken that and run with it and created their own little mini governments.
Right. And so that's now being unwound.
Yes.
And that gets into, for our pillars, that's a good thing because it frees up time that is otherwise being spent having to fight the government. It frees up time and capital to produce things, goods and services that people want and desire.
Yes.
Now, we're going to switch gears just a second here. This is my last story, and that is this is a story about the Chancellor of Germany going out of his way to attack Trump and to claim publicly that Trump has been, quote, humiliated in Iran. and as I read this article, it caused me to kind of reflect on the history of the relationship between the United States and Europe in modern times. So if you go back 100 years, it was the United States that helped Europe defeat Hitler.
Well, that was in the 30s and 40s, so it's about 80 or 90 years.
Yeah. I'm just saying, if you go back 100 years, before 100 years with World War I, we helped tip the scales in World War I. But we were in
favor of England and France against Germany.
We were an essential component in defeating
in both wars.
Yes. Well, we were. If we had not entered the First World War, they might have just kept fighting. They were fighting to a draw and killing millions of each other.
Right. It was a meat grinder.
It was a
standoff.
Grinder. Yeah. The Second World War, if we hadn't gotten involved, Europe probably would have fallen under Nazism. Great Britain would have fallen under Nazism. The world would be a very different place.
Yes.
But since the Second World War, because during the Second World War, the industrial base of Europe was destroyed by the war itself.
Right.
So after the Second World War, the U.S. employed the Marshall Plan to help Europe rebuild. And as part of that, we also formed NATO, which was a military alliance because the Soviet Union was considered to be a threat and a potential menace. And so we signed on to help protect NATO against the Soviet Union. And over the years, we have been by far the biggest financial supporter of NATO. And the countries of Europe have gotten to where they don't have to spend money on military because they've been counting on us to essentially take care of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we were spending, I think at one point, up 4 or 5% of our budget.
GDP.
Of our GDP, of the national economic output, and Europe was spending something like 1%, 0.5%.
Yeah.
They committed to spend 2%, but they never did.
Well, no. Well, they committed. They were supposed to do 2%. They wouldn't even do that. So then, when Trump won the first time, he said you're going to go to 4%.
Yeah.
And now he says you're going to go to 5%, and they've committed, but they're still not doing it.
Right.
And so it's easy to commit to do something and then not do it.
Yes.
But it's a fascinating thing to me that the German chancellor seemed to go out of his way to stick his finger in Trump's eye, and I don't think that's going to end well
for
Germany. And but so I just thought
Spain is in the same boat.
Spain is doing the same thing,
and they denied, in Italy, I think, denied use of our bases in their territory to support our flights into Iran
and to fly, and even
to fly over.
So foreign policy is not in the news for us this week, except for that one article. But I think that is kind of that's something we're going to watch.
Well, I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to come back into the national purview within the next month or two.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Now I just have a few little what I call data points, which are not stories that we can discuss. Just kind of things I'm going to tell you about facts, get your comments on them.
Okay.
But this is one where
I can comment but not discuss.
Well, you can. Well, I don't want to spend a bunch of time.
Okay.
I've got a few of these,
right.
and they're not worth 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. I just want to understand my assignment.
Yes. This is one where not the Attorney General, Secretary Brooke Rollins. She runs the SNAP program,
which is a nutritional supplement.
Which is nutritional supplements, and
at the federal level.
At the federal level,
yeah,
and they give money to the states, and the states administer. This is part of where the fraud is,
right?
Because the states have not been doing a proper job of
vetting the recipients.
Beneficiaries. So here's what she found: that SNAP. These are people who are on what we call food stamps, who claim that in the absence of federal support, they can't afford to buy food. But these same people can. These 3 of them have bought Bentleys. 3 have bought Ferraris. 11 Lamborghinis. 59 Maseratis. 141 Porsches. 244 Alfa Romeos. 306 Land Rovers, and 2,098 Teslas. So,
well, I mean, it's laughably absurd.
Yeah. And that's not, by the way, that's not looking at everybody. That's just grabbing some and saying, look at what we found.
Well, it's indicative, and it makes you wonder how much of the tip of the iceberg that points to. It's clearly corruption, but I would extend that to say you can define poverty as being any level you want to. What we regard as impoverished people now have air conditioning, carpets, plenty of food.
Yeah.
And I've seen very interesting articles by Phil Graham and his associates that if you include all those benefits, you have very few people living at an impoverished level.
Well, and
they may have a low private income, but they get enough benefits to live like a middle-class person.
Well, and part of the problem is that the way these programs are structured is that if you get a job and make money, you lose your benefits at a faster rate than the money you make.
Right.
And so it's like
why go to work?
Why work if I cannot work? And that's bad for the society because human beings are built to work.
Right.
So if you're capable of working, you shouldn't be given incentives to not work.
Well, the way I would say it is there's no dignity in dependence. Some people seem to revel in it, enjoy it, and maybe enjoy exploiting other people. But the real dignity it comes from responsibility and work.
You know, it's interesting. Years ago, I was on a plane, and I sat next to a guy who was an oral surgeon from Bowling Green, Kentucky. And we were just talking about healthcare and whatnot. And he said, Cromie, let me tell you how we do a particular thing in my field in Bowling Green. He said the city built an oral surgery center. Mm-hmm. Okay, now that's not a hospital. It's a place where oral surgeons go and do work on people's teeth and whatnot.
Right.
And he said the oral surgeons, he says, I go over there a half a day a week. Other oral surgeons go over there a half a day a week. People who need help and can't afford it come in and we do the work for free.
Yes.
And he said, so it's not, we don't get reimbursed on Medicaid. We don't get reimbursed anything. We just do it, but we also don't have to comply with all these damn government regulations, which is why we enjoy doing it for free.
Right.
And he said, but he said, now I have Medicaid patients who come into my office for oral surgery. And he said, dealing with people who are on Medicaid sometimes is exasperating because they have a terrible chip on their shoulder. He said, now the people who are in exactly the same economic circumstances who come in and I do the work for free, they show up the next day with a pie.
They're grateful.
Yeah. They want to give me something for what I've done. And I just think that's a human nature thing.
Well, I've heard stories of pre-Medicare medicine where a lot of it was barter. Particularly in rural areas, the doctors knew that people couldn't afford to pay them, so they would accept a basket of corn.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not saying we necessarily go back to that, but the way that it's operated now is there's so much fraud and there's so much abuse, and it's become part of business models of certain states that if we don't get it under control, then it's going to our deficits are still huge. So I don't want to run off that rabbit hole, but the next one is this is a subject we brought up before, but I want to give our listeners an update, and that is that this headline is California's billionaire tax proposal has gained momentum and will be on the November ballot. They've turned in 1.5 million signatures, and about 800,000 are required. So it will be on the November ballot, which imposes a one-time tax on people's net worth of 5% above $1 billion. And so it'll be interesting to see what the voters in California, what they do about that. Because if they vote to do it, my guess is that that billionaires in California will recognize that while they might have to pay one time, they will say, you know what, if they're going to do this to me once, why won't they do it?
How
to
long
me
before
again?
they come back?
Before they do it again.
That's what history tells us. But
Yes.
let's do the math. If you have $1 billion,
then you're not taxed. Well, if it's $1 billion, you're not taxed. If you have $2 billion,
okay, well,
then you're going to be taxed $50 million.
That's what I was trying to get to. Because out of a $1 billion, let's say your second $1 billion, 1% of that is $10 million, and so 5% of that is $50 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're going to have to pay $50 million in taxes, and it's not like you've got $50 million of cash sitting around.
Right.
Probably your assets are tied up in a business.
Yes.
So you're going to have to sell part of your business, and then you have to pay taxes to the federal government in order to sell if you have a capital gain. So it'll have
That's income tax.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It will have a cascadingly negative effect, and will probably chase 80 to 90% of billionaires out of California over the next 3 to 5 years.
Let me mention another cascading
And they'll
effect.
never go back, by the way.
Oh, the people who leave?
People who leave won't go back.
Well, it's like a cat, once you've been burned by a hot stove, they won't go near a stove again, whether it's hot or not.
Okay.
But there's another cascading prospect in play, and that is, I understand, a representative has been elected in New Jersey who is going to propose $25 national minimum wage. Someone has brought to my attention recently that there are a lot of federal employee and private union pay rates that are pegged to the minimum wage.
Right. So
they are all for a bigger minimum wage because their wages are going to get revalued.
Automatically go up.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's another thing, that there's nothing in the Constitution, says Congress has the authority to
establish
establish a national minimum wage.
Yes.
And that's a state can, but there's nothing says that. This is an interesting headline, and this is an amazing story, because this is one that confused you when I read you the headline, and you couldn't digest what actually happened. Democrat nominee for the University of Michigan Board of Regents has filed a wrongful death suit on behalf of an attempted cop killer whose gun jammed while trying to shoot up a police station. And then that particular person who was trying to shoot up the police station was shot and killed by the police at that time.
While he was standing there with a jammed gun trying to unjam it.
And
they shot him.
And so now this is somebody who wants to be on the board of Regents of Michigan, who is now filing a wrongful death suit on behalf of the person who was trying to shoot up the police station.
Well, this is like that earlier story about waiting until they're standing and waiting until you're harmed.
I don't think this guy was standing at the end.
Well, so I guess you're supposed to wait till you're shot, and then you are harmed, and then you have standing to shoot the guy.
Yeah, there you go. So anyway, it's just a fascinating thing. This one, when I read this story, I laughed out loud. It's a sad story, but there's part of it that's just plain funny. And this is media bias. This is the DHS shames legacy media going to bat for an illegal immigrant who was wielding a machete against his former girlfriend and her former girlfriend's boyfriend. Mm. He was trying to kill him with a machete. And this happened in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He's an illegal immigrant.
Is there a difference between an illegal immigrant and an illegal immigrant?
No, they're exactly
the same?
They are the same.
In Tennessee, they're the same.
Different accent.
All right.
Yeah. But the media reports, instead of calling this person an illegal immigrant, they call him a Green Bay man. They refer to him as a Green Bay man wielding a machete.
Yes.
So it's like the Maryland man. I mean, it's the media just simply cannot bring itself to report when an illegal immigrant is a violent person. Just cannot bring themselves to do it, even though their job is to inform the public of the truth.
Well, those terms are called euphemisms, because they paper over the real meaning of something with some bland, bureaucratic, or kind of passive language. It's really interesting. I remember there was a lot of that in the Nixon administration, calling criminal things these terms that sounded innocuous.
Yeah. Well,
I don't remember the details.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
And the Babylon Bee does a wonderful job of capturing
playing with that
type of thing. They're very good at it. This one is one where the headline is, a Democrat devises another Trojan horse to strangle gun store owners. This is in Michigan. You have a state senator who is promulgating legislation that seeks to impose new requirements on Michigan gun stores, including requiring them to obtain a state license by fulfilling a number of requirements, one of which is to have obtained a federal firearms license before they can get the state license. Well, that doesn't sound all that bad,
right?
Except if you read where getting the federal license, you have to have your state license before the federal government will issue you a license.
So it's a catch-22.
So this is a way for this legislature to think they're being very clever to make it impossible for a gun store owner to get a license. So, and that gets into the corruption
right.
to me. This one's interesting on Jimmy Kimmel and all the controversy about him and how his supporters claim he has a right to free speech. He can say whatever he wants to, and that he didn't, and what he said wasn't all that terrible anyway. And he works for ABC. Well, what's interesting is if you go back and look at the history of ABC, there are actually 2 times where there were conservative people who were on their shows who expressed conservative points of view, not nearly as vile as Jimmy Kimmel's views.
His vile comment was that Melania looked like an expectant widow.
Yeah, well, that's one. Another one was when he said that it was MAGA that was essentially associated with the death of Charlie Kirk. And he's done some other things about Trump. He said some quite terrible things about Trump, implying all kinds of things.
Right.
But the point I'm trying to make is that Disney fired Gina Carano.
Oh, yeah.
And she had just made a couple of conservative posts. They twisted all those around, and her show was a very popular and profitable show. And then Roseanne Barr had the #1 rated show on network TV, and she made a couple of comments, and they fired her and canceled her show. And so this is the same network who believes that people who are on there. And by the way, when they got rid of Corona, they put out a press release saying that Corona's social media, quote, denigrated people based on their cultural and religious identities is abhorrent and unacceptable.
My comment would be that the First Amendment argument is about crime. That's probably not prosecutable under our laws about expression as a criminal act. But
unless you're encouraging people to kill politicians.
No, there are certain exceptions, but very limited exceptions.
Right.
What I heard you say is that the commercial attachment to that, the willingness to employ somebody that says those things, it'd be like an employer who refused to fire somebody that was profane all the time and offending everybody all day long. I don't have to employ somebody like that.
Correct.
I may not be able to put them in jail for their free speech rights, but I don't have to give them a paycheck.
Yeah, and all I'm pointing out is that the ABC executives who are defending
very one-sided in the way
they're one-sided in their interpretation of freedom of speech. They can do that legally.
Yes,
but it doesn't change the fact that whether or not they're hypocrites. There's a teacher, and this is in Wisconsin, who put out a tweet that he is not impressed with recent presidential assassins, and he is complaining. He's complaining that previous assassins were successful. He pointed out John Wilkes Booth. I guess there's Oswald. There's 4 assassins who succeeded. And he puts out a tweet that he's very distressed about how ineffective today's assassins are, and he has been put on administrative leave. He wasn't fired; he's been put on administrative leave.
By whom?
He's a teacher in Wisconsin, so whoever at a public school, and so they didn't fire him, but he's on administrative leave, and whether or not he's being paid while he's on administrative leave is an open question. But I just find that to be another little data point of.
Well, we just have 2 stories here about how organizations deal with vileness.
Mm-hmm.
They're both talking about vile expressions from somebody that's a private employee and then an employee of a public entity, a state, right?
Yeah.
A school
one's
system.
a private company, and the
one's
other,
a school system.
Yeah. And now there's 2 or 3 here, Michael. We'll wind up with this, but this is interesting. There's a University of Pennsylvania professor, Jonathan Zimmerman, and this is something that he wrote. And I'll quote from it because it's a great story from the Chronicles of Higher Education. And he says, "Quote: In March of last year, about 2/3 after President Trump, after 2 months after President Trump returned to the White House, I traveled to Washington for a meeting of American education scholars. The opening panel focused, appropriately enough, on Trump's threat to the university funding, free speech on campus, and more. Then it was time for questions, and I raised my hand. I said that I agreed with all the critiques of Trump, but I also wondered what those of us who work in higher education might have done or not done to bring about this awful moment. Could we use it to look in the mirror, I asked, and not just circle the wagons? Dead silence. Then another member of the audience spoke up. I just wanted to say that I am deeply offended by Professor Zimmerman's use of the term circle the wagons, which connotes a hateful history of Native American displacement and genocide, she said, as I remember it, and then another awkward silence. Finally, the moderator of the panel interjected with something along the lines of, thank you for reminding us that we need to be careful in the language that we use to describe others. So the panel began with a diatribe about Donald Trump's assault on free speech and concluded with a warning about how we must watch our words.
Well, these stories are delightful in some ways because they just show how inane a lot of the behavior is in cultures. I'm trying to think in institutions. That's the word.
Yeah.
That supposedly are highly respected, highly refined, accomplished, learned, etc., and they're just ridiculous. And I saw something this week about I think Forbes magazine has an article of the non-Ivies. I think it is. They exclude the Ivies, and then there are some institutions that are considered near Ivies, like Stanford and Duke and others. But Forbes is looking at schools that are forging a new way, and how their students prosper, and it's very interesting. How there may be a new vanguard in what's considered excellence.
Let me say this. I have grandkids who have gone through the process of applying for and going to college. And the University of Tennessee, by the way, Randy Boyd has done a fabulous job in his position. I think he oversees the board of whatnot. But the education at the University of Tennessee now is valued at much more greatly. The number of applicants they get, all the SEC schools are getting a gigantic increase in applications,
right? And
it's because that they're focused on education, and not on indoctrination, and so it's going to be interesting to see because the Ivies are while Harvard still gets an awful lot of smart people applying, the number of smart people applying is dropping at a considerable rate.
Right.
And that's to the points that you're making.
Yes.
This is another one. Barney Frank was one of the most liberal members of Congress when he was in Congress, and a very powerful member of Congress, and a smart guy.
From Massachusetts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very smart guy. That didn't mean he had good policies, but he was intellectually, he was very smart.
He was articulate?
Yeah. So I'm just going to read the story from Politico. This is in the quoting a former Representative Barney Frank, a liberal icon, who was a key architect of the landmark Wall Street regulations the Democrats enacted in the wake of the 2000 financial crisis, has entered hospice care at his home in Maine. And as one of his last acts, he is preparing to release a book repudiating his party's left flank. Now, this is fascinating because when Barney Frank was a member of Congress, he was about as far left as any Democrat was at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going back, remember, 2008, now we're at 2026. Barney Frank left around 2010, left Congress around 2010 or 12. His latest book is set to be released later this year. Quote, I face a literal deadline, so I don't know how we'll adjust to that, he said. He's hoping, quote, to use his reputation and my record of being on the left to give courage to many of my colleagues who I know agree with me but are inhibited from saying so. Continuing the quote, for a lot of my colleagues, the argument has been, well, I don't support defund the police or open borders, and I don't say we do. Frank said, but my point is, no, that's not enough, being simply silent. We must explicitly repudiate it. Now, that is an amazing thing to me to come from somebody who was, in his time, about as far left as a Democrat could be. It shows you how much farther left the Democrat Party has moved.
Well, it also demonstrates what I would call a horrible dilemma for people in that position, which is you can renounce half of your base and then think you can win a general election without their support, or you can be silent and try to have them go along with you and then maybe try to moderate. But moderate Democrats, I saw one on a panel this week he was a lobbyist, and he said, I'm in the moderate wing of a consultant, not a lobbyist, a consultant. And there was some ridiculous progressive thing they were discussing, and he said, I don't like that, and I will always represent the moderate wing of my party. If they don't renounce it, they keep getting pulled in the whirlpool that the aggressive, progressive left is creating.
Yeah, and where the left is, where the Democrats are now, back in September, there was a single Democrat from Maine who voted along with Republicans to keep the government open. Now, the House was going to vote to keep the government open, so his vote didn't change anything.
Right.
But he was also in a district that Trump carried either 7 or 9 points. So it was actually, he was representing his district by voting to keep the government open. The next day, the Government Employee Union of Maine, that represents most of the government employees in Maine, came out and said, that won't stand. We're going to primary him in the next Democrat primary. A month later, he announced he wasn't going to run for re-election.
Right.
So that's the problem that, as you point out, that's the problem that Democrats find themselves in now, is that they can't be what Barney Frank used to be. Now he was a left-leaning person, but by today's standards, he was actually quite reasonable. So that's what's happened in 20 years.
I think one thing I would like to observe is I think Trump has a big role in this. You know, not only is he broken the mold and convinced some, particularly male, blue voters to come over to the red side. You know, young ethnic people, I think, vote, and women voted for him in unusual amounts. I'm not sure women would today because there's a lot of stuff that they seem to be riled up about, or at least that's what the media tells us.
We will know.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say is I think he's really good at goading the left into losing their self control. Hakeem Jeffries comes to me in this mind. He says the most ridiculous thing. It's total warfare all the time. Well, he will not back off ridiculous things that he says, even when challenged.
No Democrat in the House, and no Democrat who is wants to run for president is saying anything different than Hakeem Jeffries.
Right.
And so it's an interesting thing because they're the ones who are getting all the media time.
Yeah. And it's a good way of destroying the left by getting more and more of them to just be absurd.
Well, we'll see. It depends on how the elections go.
Well, that's a fair point.
This one is interesting. This is from Reason magazine. A gentleman named J.D., and I'm going to mispronounce his last name, but Tucksill, Tuccille.
Okay.
And here's his quote, and this is really
it would be Lucille if you put an L, so maybe he's Tuccill.
Tuccill. All right. Thank you very much. Government shouldn't be important enough to motivate people to kill others to gain control. Moreover, people willing to engage in violence to seize the means of governance have no business exercising political power. These are points that we should be drumming home after the latest in a series of assassination attempts against President Trump and other administration officials at the time of surging political violence. And to me, what he's getting to is really the heart of what's driving all this, and that is Trump is actually trying to change the last 50, 60, 70 years, whatever number you want to pick, of government getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more and more and more powerful. He's trying to change that. And the people who liked their money and like their power don't like that. That's why
some are driven to violence by the loss of those.
Yeah. And my last one here, and this is kind of an e-bike. Is it even worse than an e-bus? Rick Hurd reports from the San Jose Mercury News. So this is kind of something for our listeners just to know. It says a 13-year-old boy died last month in an e-bike crash in East San Jose. Weeks earlier, a 4-year-old Burlington boy was killed and a 6-year-old girl injured in a chain reaction crash sparked by an e-bike. At John Murrah Health Emergency Room, Dr. Russell Rodriguez says the injuries his trauma team sees increasingly resemble those of much larger and faster vehicles. The types of neurological and orthopedic injuries we are treating are much closer to those associated with motorcycles than with a simple non-motorized bicycles. And so what you're seeing is these e-bikes, they get up to like 30 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And the people who are riding them think of them as a bike, not as a motorcycle.
Right.
But if you get in a wreck, the results are much closer
to those of a motorcycle.
Yeah. And so for those who want to get their 10-year-old kids an e-bike, don't. That's our message.
I worked as a volunteer in an emergency room when I was in college, and I was a co-op, and I went to work every other quarter. So in work quarters, on Wednesday nights, I would go and volunteer at the local emergency room. And there was a kid that came in one time who had been on a skateboard. His dad let him hold on to the handle of the car while he rode alongside and accelerated up to maybe 20 or 30 miles an hour on a skateboard. So he got to go really fast. Well, he lost his balance, went under the wheel.
Oh.
You could see the tire marks coming up his body.
Oh.
It damaged him pretty well. We sent him off to, this was in Maryland, sent him off to Johns Hopkins for plastic surgery.
Oh, my.
And just think about the stupidity involved in that.
Yes.
You know, my son would sometimes take a watch and spin it in the air. And I would tell him, Thomas, there's nothing good that can come from that. Losing a watch is not the worst thing, but keep in mind, there's no constructive outcome of what you're doing. Why are you doing it? Right. And I think it's kind of the same way. If somebody, you think everything's just going to go like you imagine it, and it's pretty stupid.
Yeah. Well, Michael, we're going to call it a day here. We went through a bunch of different topics, but going back to our framework of the 5 pillars that a civil, prosperous society depends on existing, and we tried to have a number of stories that apply to those five pillars.
Well, I think it's a very useful frame of reference to evaluate things, and I really like this way of going through the topics of the day and comparing to that frame of reference.
Yeah, and we'll try to bring it back to as time permits and as the logic applies to the upcoming election. And we did some of that today with these redistricting fights and all these different issues.
There will be a lot more fireworks for us to compare.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Okay.